chosen one. There is a moment that confuses people more than any confrontation ever could. It happens when someone hurts you deeply, when they cross a line that should never have been crossed, when their actions leave a mark that most people would carry like a weapon for the rest of their lives. Yet instead of seeking revenge, instead of raising your voice, instead of chasing them down with anger, you choose something quieter. You choose forgiveness. And the moment you do, something strange begins to unfold around you. Some people watch that decision and immediately misunderstand it. They assume that because you forgave them, you must have forgotten what happened. They assume that because you didn't retaliate, you must lack the strength to fight back. In their mind, forgiveness equals softness, and softness equals weakness. They think they can walk back into your life as if nothing happened. They believe the consequences have disappeared. They believe you will tolerate the same behavior again. And that misunderstanding is far more dangerous than they realize. Because forgiveness, when it comes from someone who has walked closely with God, is not surrender. It is not permission. It is not an invitation to repeat the same harm. Forgiveness is something much deeper and far more strategic than the people around you can comprehend. It is the deliberate release of bitterness while keeping wisdom, clarity, and boundaries firmly in place. Most people have never been taught the difference. In many social environments, power is defined by retaliation. Whoever shouts the loudest, whoever strikes back the hardest, whoever proves they cannot be crossed without consequences, is the one who is respected. So when they see someone who refuses to operate within that system, they do not recognize strength. They see calmness and assume it must come from weakness. But calmness does not mean you are powerless. Often it means you understand power at a level they have never experienced. The truth is that many people only understand conflict because conflict is the only language they know. Their world revolves around dominance, control, and reaction. When someone insults them, they respond with greater insult. When someone betrays them, they respond with retaliation. Their entire identity is built on the idea that respect must be enforced through confrontation. So when they encounter a chosen one who refuses to follow that script, their mind cannot process it correctly. They watch you forgive and assume you are naive. They watch you stay calm and assume you are unaware. They watch you walk away without revenge and assume you lack the courage to respond. What they fail to see is that forgiveness requires a level of emotional discipline that most people never develop. It requires the ability to control your reactions, to understand the difference between justice and bitterness, and to trust that God sees what human eyes may overlook. When God teaches someone how to forgive, He is not teaching them how to tolerate abuse. He is teaching them how to remove the poison of resentment from their heart so it cannot control their future. Because resentment is a heavy burden. It ties your energy to the person who hurt you. It keeps your thoughts revolving around the past. It drains your focus and slowly redirects your life around someone who no longer deserves that much influence. God understands that if His chosen ones carry that weight forever, they will never move freely toward the purpose He designed for them. So forgiveness becomes an act of spiritual discipline. It is a way of releasing the emotional chain that connects you to the person who wronged you. But what many people fail to understand is that releasing bitterness does not mean removing wisdom. Forgiveness clears your heart, but it does not erase your memory. It does not rewrite what happened. It does not blind you to someone's character. Instead, it sharpens your understanding of who people truly are. When you forgive someone, you are not saying their actions were acceptable. You are saying their actions will no longer control your peace. That difference changes everything. Because the moment you forgive, you stop carrying the emotional weight of their mistake. And when that weight disappears, something else begins to emerge in its place. Clarity. calmness, distance, strength that no longer depends on confrontation. And this is where the misunderstanding begins to reveal itself. Because while they believe forgiveness has made you weak, something far more powerful has actually started to happen beneath the surface. The power dynamic that once existed between you and them is quietly beginning to shift. Chosen one, the reason people misread your forgiveness has less to do with what you did and far more to do with how they understand power. Many individuals have grown up in environments where strength is measured by visible force. Whoever raises their voice, whoever dominates the room, whoever retaliates the fastest becomes the person others perceive as powerful. In that kind of world, anger is mistaken for authority, and aggression becomes the currency of respect. So when you choose not to operate within that pattern, their minds struggle to interpret what they are seeing. When you forgive someone, instead of responding with hostility, they automatically compare your behavior to the reactions they would have displayed in the same situation. And because they would have responded with confrontation, they assume that your restraint must mean you lack the ability to respond at all. This misunderstanding grows out of a psychological habit that almost everyone shares to some degree. People project their own instincts onto others. If they believe revenge is the natural response to betrayal, then forgiveness appears unnatural. If retaliation feels like justice in their mind, then mercy appears like surrender. They cannot imagine why someone would willingly release anger unless that person was powerless to act otherwise. But the truth is that projection reveals more about their inner character than about your decision. They judge your silence using the limits of their own emotional discipline. They assume that because they would not have the strength to forgive, you must not have the strength to defend yourself. Yet forgiveness does not come from weakness. It comes from control. And control is something most people never truly learn. Anger is easy. Reaction is easy. Revenge is easy. Anyone can respond emotionally when they feel wounded. But forgiveness requires something far more demanding. It requires the ability to step back from the heat of the moment and see the situation with clarity. It requires you to recognize that carrying resentment will not heal the damage that was done. It requires you to trust that God's justice is more complete than any temporary retaliation you could create in your own hands. That kind of restraint confuses people, because it contradicts the rules they believe govern human behavior. They expect emotional escalation. They expect conflict to spiral until someone wins and someone loses. But when you forgive calmly and move forward without participating in that escalation, the script they were expecting suddenly collapses. Their interpretation of forgiveness is also shaped by another assumption. They mistake peace for passivity. When they hear the word forgiveness, they imagine someone pretending that nothing happened. They imagine someone erasing the past, reopening the same doors, and allowing the same patterns to continue. In their mind, forgiveness must mean forgetting. And if you forget, then you can easily be manipulated again. This belief is extremely common because many people have only experienced a shallow version of forgiveness, the kind that ignores problems rather than resolving them. But real forgiveness does not erase awareness. Real forgiveness does not require you to restore the same level of access someone once had to your life. It simply removes the emotional poison that resentment leaves behind. Forgiveness clears your heart, not your memory. You still remember what happened. You still recognize the patterns that caused the damage. You still understand the character of the person involved. What changes is your relationship to the pain itself. Instead of allowing it to dominate your thoughts and dictate your future decisions, you release it so that your life is no longer organized around someone else's mistake. For someone who relies on emotional manipulation, this transformation is difficult to detect at first. They see the absence of anger and assume the entire conflict has disappeared. They believe the door has reopened exactly where it once stood. They believe the situation has returned to the way it used to be. But beneath the surface, something much more significant has occurred. Forgiveness has removed the emotional battlefield that once existed between you. The anger they expected is gone. The resentment they could have used to provoke reactions is gone. The arguments they could have manipulated are gone. What remains is something they rarely encounter: calm clarity. And clarity is far more powerful than anger ever was. Because when you are no longer driven by emotional reaction, you begin to see people exactly as they are. You recognize the patterns that once went unnoticed. You observe behavior without being pulled into it. You respond with measured distance instead of emotional intensity. At first, they may interpret this calmness as weakness. They may assume that because you forgave them, the old dynamic can simply continue. But forgiveness does not preserve the past. It quietly changes the structure of the relationship. The emotional leverage they once had begins to disappear, and they do not immediately realize why. The tension they once used to control your reactions is gone. The guilt they once used to manipulate your decisions is gone. The drama they once relied on to keep you engaged is gone. Without realizing it, they have lost the very tools that once gave them influence. And that is when the real surprise begins to unfold. Because forgiveness, far from weakening your position, has actually begun to remove the power they once believed they had over you. Chosen one. The moment forgiveness enters the picture, something begins to change that most people cannot immediately see. From the outside, it appears as if you simply decided to move on, as if the conflict quietly dissolved and life continued as usual. But beneath that calm surface, a deeper shift begins to take place. The emotional connection that once tied you to the person who hurt you starts to loosen, almost like an invisible rope being cut strand by strand. Resentment has a strange way of binding people together even after trust has been broken. When anger lives inside you, the person who caused that anger still occupies space in your mind. Your thoughts return to them again and again. You replay conversations. You imagine different outcomes. You feel the urge to defend yourself, to prove something, to regain control over a situation that once wounded you. In that state, whether you realize it or not, the person who hurt you continues to influence your emotional world. Your energy remains partially attached to them. Forgiveness breaks that connection. The moment you truly forgive, the emotional leash disappears. You are no longer tied to the memory of what happened in the same way. You no longer wake up thinking about them with the same intensity. The situation becomes something you understand, rather than something that controls you. And when that emotional chain breaks, the power dynamic between you and them begins to shift in a way they never anticipated. Many people who manipulate others rely on emotional reactions to maintain influence. They depend on anger, guilt, and confusion to keep someone engaged in the conflict. As long as you are emotionally entangled, they can predict your responses. They know what will upset you. They know how to provoke you. They know how to pull you back into the same cycle of argument and reconciliation. That predictability is their advantage. But forgiveness removes the emotional hooks they once used to control the situation. When you forgive calmly and refuse to carry bitterness, you become unpredictable to someone who expected emotional reactions. They may try to provoke you again, expecting the same anger they once triggered so easily. But the response they receive is different now. Instead of hostility, they encounter calm distance. Instead of emotional engagement, they encounter clarity. And clarity is something manipulators rarely know how to handle. Their strategies were designed for conflict, not for peace. They know how to argue, blame, and escalate. They know how to pull someone into emotional turbulence where confusion makes control easier. But when the person they expected to manipulate stands calmly outside that turbulence, the entire strategy begins to collapse. Without anger to provoke, their attempts to create drama lose their impact. Without resentment to exploit, their attempts to regain influence lose their leverage. they begin to realize something they never expected. Forgiveness did not give them power. It quietly removed the power they once had. Another transformation begins to unfold at the same time. The mental energy that once fueled resentment becomes available again. When someone hurts you deeply, your thoughts naturally return to that event again and again. Your mind tries to understand what happened. It tries to reconstruct the moment, searching for explanations or closure. That process can consume an extraordinary amount of emotional energy. Days, weeks, even years can pass while someone remains mentally trapped inside a situation that already belongs to the past. Forgiveness interrupts that cycle. When you release the need for revenge, the mental space that was once occupied by resentment begins to clear. Suddenly, your attention shifts towards something new. Instead of thinking about the person who hurt you, you begin thinking about the direction of your own life. Goals that once felt distant come back into focus. Ideas that were overshadowed by emotional stress begin to surface again. The energy that once fueled conflict now fuels growth. This is one of the hidden strengths of forgiveness. It allows you to reclaim your attention and redirect it toward purpose rather than revenge. God never intended for his chosen ones to spend their lives trapped in emotional battles with people who have already revealed their character. When God guides someone toward forgiveness, he is not asking them to ignore injustice. He is helping them remove the distractions that could delay their purpose. Because resentment keeps your focus locked on the past, while purpose always points toward the future. The moment forgiveness takes root, the direction of your life begins to change. Your attention returns to the path God has prepared for you, and as your focus moves forward, the person who once believed they held influence over you begins to feel something unfamiliar: distance. They sense that the emotional connection they once relied on has disappeared. Their words no longer trigger the same reactions. Their presence no longer carries the same weight. They may not understand exactly why, but they begin to realize that something has changed. The conflict they expected no longer exists, yet the closeness they once enjoyed has quietly faded as well. This is the paradox of forgiveness that many people fail to anticipate. They assumed forgiveness would restore the old dynamic. Instead, forgiveness dissolved the emotional control that made that dynamic possible in the first place. And as that realization slowly unfolds, the balance of power between you and them continues to move in a direction they never expected. Chosen one. The moment forgiveness removes the emotional weight of the past, another lesson quietly emerges, one that many people around you may never fully understand. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. These two ideas are often confused, but they are not the same thing. Forgiveness is something that happens within your heart, while reconciliation requires trust, accountability, and change from the other person. You can release bitterness towards someone without restoring the same level of access they once had to your life. And for many chosen ones walking closely with God, this distinction becomes one of the most important forms of wisdom they will ever learn. When people see you forgive them, they sometimes assume the door has reopened exactly where it once stood. They imagine that forgiveness erases consequences. They believe the relationship can simply return to its previous form, as if the past never happened. But true forgiveness does not rewrite history. It acknowledges what happened clearly, learns from it, and then chooses peace instead of resentment. Peace, however, does not require proximity. Peace does not require you to place yourself back into environments where the same harm could occur again. And this is where the hidden strength of forgiveness begins to reveal itself. Because while many people believe strength comes from confrontation, some of the greatest strength comes from calm distance. When you forgive someone internally, but quietly change how much access they have to your life, you send a message that does not need to be spoken aloud. That message is simple but powerful. The past no longer controls my heart, but it has informed my wisdom. Boundaries are the practical expression of that wisdom. They are not walls built out of anger. They are not punishments meant to humiliate another person. They are simply adjustments that protect your peace and your purpose. When God teaches someone how to forgive, He often teaches them how to set boundaries at the same time. Because forgiveness removes bitterness, but boundaries preserve clarity. Without boundaries, forgiveness can be misunderstood as permission. With boundaries, forgiveness becomes something entirely different. It becomes a sign of emotional maturity. Many people struggle to understand this because they are used to relationships built on emotional cycles. Conflict followed by apology, apology followed by temporary peace, and eventually the same patterns repeating again. In those cycles, forgiveness often becomes a reset button that allows the same dynamic to continue indefinitely. But when a chosen one forgives while also establishing boundaries, the cycle breaks. The person who expected things to return to normal suddenly realizes that something has changed. You are not attacking them. You are not accusing them. You are not engaging in arguments about the past. Yet, the access they once had to your time, your energy, and your personal space is no longer the same. At first, this can confuse them deeply. They may try to test the new boundaries, expecting the old dynamic to return. They may attempt to reopen conversations that lead back to familiar emotional patterns. They may even accuse you of being distant or cold because they sense the shift but cannot explain it. But consistency reveals the truth of your transformation. You remain calm. You remain respectful. You do not return hostility with hostility. Yet, you also do not allow the same behavior to continue unchecked. The peace you carry does not make you passive. It makes you clear. And clarity changes the entire structure of the relationship. Over time, the people around you begin to recognize something important. Your forgiveness was real, but so was your wisdom. The version of you they once knew, the one who tolerated certain patterns, the one who remained emotionally entangled in conflict, no longer exists in the same form. God has refined your strength in a quieter way. Instead of reacting impulsively, you observe carefully. Instead of defending yourself through confrontation, you protect your peace through boundaries. Instead of trying to change people who refuse to change themselves, you simply adjust your proximity to them. This is one of the most powerful forms of growth a chosen one can experience. Because boundaries reveal something that anger never could. Anger demands attention, but boundaries quietly change behavior. When someone realizes that their actions now determine how close they can remain to you, they begin to understand that forgiveness did not erase accountability. The relationship simply entered a new structure, and that structure is built on awareness rather than emotion. God often leads His chosen ones into this level of maturity because their purpose requires clarity of relationships. When your life begins to move toward greater purpose, not everyone who once had access to you can remain in the same position. Some relationships evolve and become stronger through honesty and growth. Others gradually fade because they depended on patterns that no longer exist. Forgiveness allows this transition to happen without bitterness. Boundaries ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten. Together, they create a form of strength that most people rarely witness. The strongest form of forgiveness is not dramatic. It does not announce itself loudly. It simply appears as calm distance, paired with unwavering peace. And over time, the people who once misunderstood your forgiveness begin to realize that it did not make you weaker. It made you wiser. Chosen one. By the time forgiveness and boundaries have both taken their place in your life, something subtle but undeniable begins to reveal itself. The people who once misinterpreted your forgiveness start to recognize that they misunderstood you from the very beginning. At first, they believed your calmness meant you were vulnerable. They assumed your kindness meant you could be controlled. They believed your refusal to retaliate meant you lacked the strength to protect yourself. In their mind, the story seemed simple. You forgave because you were too soft to fight back. But as time moves forward, reality begins to tell a very different story. The version of you they expected never returns. The same emotional reactions they once relied on never appear again. The same arguments that once consumed your attention never restart. Instead, they see someone who has become quieter but stronger, calmer but more certain, peaceful yet completely unmoved by the same patterns that once created tension. Slowly, they begin to realize that forgiveness did not bring you back under their influence. It removed their influence entirely. That realization often arrives gradually. At first, they may believe the distance between you is temporary. They assume that eventually things will go back to the way they were. But weeks pass, then months, and the structure of the relationship remains different. Your peace remains steady. Your boundaries remain consistent. Your attention remains directed toward your own growth rather than the conflicts of the past. Eventually, the misunderstanding begins to dissolve. They see that your forgiveness was not an emotional surrender. It was emotional discipline. Discipline is something many people rarely develop. It requires the ability to control impulses that feel powerful in the moment. It requires maturity, strong enough to resist the temptation of revenge, even when revenge might feel justified. Most people respond to pain immediately and instinctively. They react before they reflect. They speak before they think. But forgiveness requires a different kind of strength. The strength to pause, to observe, and to choose a response that protects your long-term peace instead of satisfying a short-term emotion. When someone witnesses that kind of discipline, they begin to recognize that they underestimated you. What they believed was weakness was actually restraint. What they believed was passivity was actually awareness. What they believed was softness was actually control. And control is one of the clearest signs of real strength. Because anyone can react emotionally when provoked. But only a person grounded in wisdom can decide which battles deserve their attention and which ones should simply be released. God often refines his chosen ones through exactly this process. Forgiveness becomes one of the tools he uses to strengthen their character. It teaches patience in moments of anger. It teaches clarity in moments of confusion. It teaches the ability to remain steady even when others expect chaos. Through this process, you begin to realize something that changes the way you view conflict entirely. Not every victory requires confrontation. Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to carry the burden of someone else's mistake any longer. When you forgive, you stop carrying their actions inside your heart. You stop reliving the moment they wronged you. You stop allowing the past to shape your emotional future. Instead, you step forward with a lighter spirit and a clearer understanding of who people truly are. That clarity becomes one of your greatest strengths, because once you see people clearly, you no longer need to argue with them. You no longer need to prove anything. You simply adjust your presence accordingly. The people who belong in your life naturally move closer through honesty and growth. The people who cannot respect your peace gradually move further away through their own choices. Either way, your life begins to reorganize itself around wisdom rather than emotion. And this is the quiet reversal that those who underestimated you rarely expect. While they believed forgiveness would restore their influence, it actually removed their leverage. While they expected you to remain emotionally available to the same patterns, you stepped into a new level of awareness that made those patterns impossible to repeat. Over time, they begin to recognize that something they once held has slipped from their hands. Access, influence, emotional control. All the subtle forms of leverage that once existed in the relationship quietly disappear, and in their place stands something they cannot easily challenge: peace. Peace that does not depend on their approval. Peace that does not collapse when conflict appears. Peace that remains steady because it is rooted in something deeper than human behavior. It is rooted in God. When God teaches someone how to forgive, He is not only healing their heart, He is strengthening their spirit. He is teaching them how to walk through life without becoming trapped in the emotional chaos that surrounds so many relationships. That kind of peace becomes a form of power that no argument can defeat. Because the person who carries true peace cannot be manipulated by anger, guilt, or fear. They are guided by something higher than the opinions of others. And that is the final lesson many people learn too late. Forgiveness is not the absence of strength. It is strength, refined. It is the ability to release what could have hardened your heart and replace it with wisdom that protects your future. When you forgive, you do not erase the past. You simply stop allowing it to define your direction. You stop carrying the weight of someone else's mistake through the rest of your life. And in that moment, something remarkable happens. The person who once believed they had power over you realizes they misjudged you completely. Because the greatest mistake your opponent can make is believing that peace means you are powerless. Before we finish, take a moment to reflect on this message. If something in these words resonated with you, it may be because you are learning one of the hardest lessons God teaches His chosen ones, that forgiveness is not weakness. It is strength, guided by wisdom. If this message helped you see forgiveness in a new light, take a second to like this video. It helps this message reach others who may be struggling with the same misunderstanding. You can also share it with someone who needs encouragement right now. And if you want more content about the journey of the chosen ones, spiritual growth, and the lessons God teaches through life's challenges, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next message. Thank you for being here. And remember, true strength is not always loud. Sometimes it shows up as quiet peace and unwavering clarity. I'll see you in the next video.